welcome Josh Kaufman. Josh is the executive director of Teach Plus. Come on up, Josh.
Thank you. So I was debating two different stories that I was thinking of telling today, and one was really, really dark about all of the terrible things that happen in our school systems. But then I was thinking, it is the last day of school, and it's Friday, and it's summer, and so I'm not going with that story. But I am going to tell a story about leadership, sort of a story of two schools. A good leader can make a school, and a bad leader can break a school. And I know because I've worked for both. My first school in New York City, where I taught for 6 years, had what could only generously be called bad leadership. We had a principal who was incredibly picky about absolutely nothing, and he would shout and yell at teachers for the smallest of things. I remember waiting outside his office one day, and the technical theater arts teacher was in there, and he was being yelled at for like 30 minutes because he had hung the curtains like slightly the wrong way in the theater. And I mean, okay, maybe it was a mistake, but really, 30 minutes of yelling at someone, you would think as a principal you should know how to encourage people. That was really nothing compared to one of the other administrators who had engineered a cheating scandal on the New York State Regents exam that was so bad that ultimately, at the end of the year, New York State changed the way all exams were graded across the state. So that was the bad. And after 6 years of that, I decided I'd had enough of that. And I'd had enough of that high-paid urban teaching work. So what? No, seriously. So I took a position as a volunteer teacher in Namibia, which, if you don't know where it is, don't feel bad, because for half of us, it wasn't a country when we were going to school. But Namibia is in southern Africa. It's just up and to the left of South Africa. And so I was teaching, I got a job teaching in Namibia, and I was teaching at a school called Canisianum, which is sort of an oxymoron in US terms. It was a government-funded Catholic school, which I know doesn't exist here, but it made sense for that country because of a whole bunch of historical reasons that I won't go into because they're actually rather boring. But it sort of functioned like a charter school. They sort of had to partly answer to the government, partly answer to the Catholic Church. There was just a lot more praying than in a regular charter school. And they had dormitories, which wasn't common for all high schools there, but for some of them. Anyway, that was a place where I met a leader that I could believe in. And the principal there was a man named Werner Kalippi. And Mr. Kalippi was a short native Namibian with a very large pot belly and these sort of like furrowed brows that were salt and pepper and these piercing eyes. And he had this very sort of, he was very easy to laugh, but he was even easier to bark. And I experienced that bark the very first day of school. We were at our very first staff meeting, and there was a small school, so there may be 13 or 14 teachers sitting in the staff room, and the principal comes in, and he says, "This is not like those other schools you are at. At our school, you must always come to work on time. At our school, you must work hard. At our school, the learners must learn. And if you do not do that, oh, poo, you are finished." So he literally threatened to fire every teacher on the first day of school. And I mean, I was a UFT member in New York City, and then I came here and I did think, what in the world did I get myself into? I actually learned later on, however, that there was some good reason for him to take that hard stance. A friend of mine at a different school told a story about a teacher who had left the school and was hanging out on the coast with his girlfriend for 3 months, just chilling. And then he eventually called the school, not to apologize, not to beg forgiveness, but to tell them where his new address was so they could send his checks. So maybe this principal had some rationale. But I tangled with him a couple of times. The first one was actually dealing with an issue that was really prevalent in Southern Africa at the time, which was the spread of HIV. At that time in Namibia, 1 out of every 5 people in the country, 1 out of every 5 adults, was infected with HIV. So this was a huge issue. And I wanted to deal with it. I mean, my idealistic little, teacher self, like, I'm going to go teach these kids safe sex. And so I did want to talk to the principal about it beforehand because it was a Catholic school and who knew what sort of trouble I'd get in. And so I talked to the principal and I say, this is what I want to do. Are you okay with this? And he sort of furrows his brow and he says, oh yes, this is a very big problem. It's a very big problem. HIV is terrible. And the learners, they must learn about it when they're in university. And I was like, these kids are 17 years old. Like, they're not going to wait. But so I had to be a little bit of a leader myself and figure out a way around the principal on this one. And I looked in the book room because I was teaching English. I'm an English teacher. And I found in the back of the book room, sort of under all the other books, there was one young adult novel from South Africa where there was a girl that got pregnant. And like, not great in the story, but it was perfect for me because I could teach this book, and through the book, we could open up the conversation about HIV. It was a terrible book, but it didn't really matter because it sort of achieved the purpose. And I never told the principal about it. I figured that was one where, forgiveness was better than permission. He was a pretty fierce guy, as you might imagine. I saw several other examples. One day I walked into this principal's office, and there were 4 students in a row, and they were all just sitting like that, like standing like this. And I didn't know what they had done, but clearly this was the punishment that he was making them do. And I talked to him for 5 minutes, and they didn't move, and I walked away, and I don't know how long they stood there like that. But, one other time, there was one of the classes, I think it was the 11th grade class, was making a lot of noise at study hall. And so the principal said, all right, fine, if you're going to make noise, if you won't follow the rules, I'm going to kick you out of the dorms for a month. So the kids had to go into the community and find people who would let them sleep in their houses for a month until he would let them back in. So, up till now, I've told you a bunch of stories about this principal, and you may be thinking, why do you think he's a good leader? He sounds crazy. But then came Herbertha. Herbertha was one of my students. She was a 9th grader, very sweet girl, very smart, very, very quiet. She was sort of very tall and thin. And she came from a really poor family. It was so poor, she wasn't able to stay in the dorms. She had to walk 6 miles each way to come to school. And that's not a joke. That was just what her life was every day. And her family was in such desperate financial straits that they weren't sure if they were going to be able to afford the very minimal school fees for the next school year. And so I learned about this, and we were thinking about it, and I found a scholarship that she was eligible for. So I worked on a Friday afternoon. I was working on the scholarship application, and I got it done. And at about 4:30, I walked over to the principal's office to ask him to sign the scholarship. That was all I needed to do. Now, one thing about schools in Namibia is that on a Friday afternoon, they are just like schools in the United States. The kids want to go, the teachers want to go to a bar, and it's very much just like a school in the States. But I figured this would be no big deal, 2-second signature and we're done. So I bring it into the principal's office and I tell him what's going on and, how it will affect this one learner. And he furrows his eyebrows like he normally did, and he listened. And once he finally understood what the consequences were, his eyebrows unfurrowed and his eyes softened, and he read over the application again, and he picked it up and he tore it into pieces. And he said, "This is not good enough. You must write it again. I saw that sentence was not good." It's 4:30. I go back to the teacher's, room. I sit down. I write it again. I bring it back to him. Now it's 5:30. He reads it again. And he says, "No, you crossed out those words. You must not cross out any word on an application." Which was the way they did it there. So then I went back again and I wrote the whole thing again. And I came back and it was 6:30 and he read it over and he looked at it and he nodded his head and he said, "This is good. Thank you." And he signed his name on it and we both walked out of the school. And it was about 7 o'clock and the sun was setting and it was this giant fiery sun and it lit up the baobab trees and it washed the white walls of the school in this beautiful golden color. And I realized that in that moment, I had also found gold because I was working for a leader who put his students' interests in front of his own and his teachers, and they were absolutely first in the school. And that's what leadership really is to me. Thank you.
so much, Josh.